Alright. Yeah, we have to select. Alright, Alright, hi, it's me, Shauna. For context, I am redoing my Miitopia Let's Play because me and Green Ethan both agreed that we want to switch out some of our teammates. But I can't just go in and edit my Mii in-game because that will crash the game, and I can't just replace them conveniently, so yeah. Unfortunately, I have to restart. I don't like... Yeah, it kind of sucks how, you know, editing Mii's will just crash the game, but, you know, I wish I could just do that. That way, if I want to, if I need to, like, if I feel like changing my mind about, like, teammates and whatnot, I can just, you know, edit the Mii and, like, rename them. Alright, so I still need to think this through all the way, but for Greenhorn, I think I'm gonna have Ashton. Actually, I'm gonna have Moose, then Ashton. And then, of course, King Ollie. King Ollie's gonna be a cleric, because we need clerics. And then, of course, you know, I guess we'll do Sky for next door, because she'll be a cautious mage, because cautious mages go hard. And then we'll do, I guess we'll still have Taru. And then, of course, you, Green Ethan. Purple Ethan will be a tank. Yeah, I still need to think this through, but... Alright, yeah, I may need to add more later, but... You know, I'll do it off screen, but I may need to actually make some more Miis, because I'm still unsure. Ugh. No. Alright. Alright, we'll add Robbie. He's gonna be my last teammate to join. Because I want to save him for Realm of the Fae. It'll be cute. And then he'll be last, so I can rescue him first. But yeah, I'm really anxious right now, guys. Green Ethan. You know why. Especially if you look at the time and date of as I'm recording this. And yeah, I'll do some makeup and some wigs too. But yeah, Papa Smokeria Deluxe finally comes out. That 9 a.m. and like I can't sleep, guys. Right now I'm just trying to do everything in my power to get 9 a.m. here. I mean, I'll try to go to sleep after I record this, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to sleep very well. Alright. Well, Ashton doesn't wear glasses anymore. Ugh. Crap. Oh yes, I can remove them. Sorry, my freaking Joy-Con drift is going crazy. Okay, thank goodness. But yeah. Ashton, he did switch over to contacts, summer of last year. But, I've had his Mii on my emulator, since before that, so. But thank goodness we were able to remove them. And then we'll give him a snowflake sticker. Oh yeah, I need to do my Mii. I probably should have done my Mii first. Oh well. Yeah, I'm not in any rush. I kind of just want to take my time with this, because, like I said, I'm just trying to kill time. I'll probably vent a little bit in this episode, but, it's just going to kind of be a mixture of different topics. Alright, my Mii's not going to take very long. I'm a simple girl. I wish we could do this in Tomodachi Life, Living the Dream. We could just choose from any color. Speaking of, I'd like to do a Let's Play on Tomodachi Life, Living the Dream one day. But, remember how we had to figure out how to get rid of the weird, circle with the lines you know, the forbidden sign or the don't sign, whatever you want to call it. We have to figure out, I think Living the Dream has it as well, so we're gonna have to figure out how to get rid of it. If we ever want to do a let's play on the game. And then I am gonna change my eye color a little bit, because my eye color does have a greenish tint to it. My eyes, greenish tint. Yeah. Alright, that'll do it. I don't want to spend too much time on these Miis. I definitely want to do Robbie and Ollie. Let's do them. We can do the other ones later, but yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on them, like I said. I do want to get into the game. Alright. Joy-Con drift. Alright, and then we'll do Robbie, and then we'll get started with the game. Alright, I'm gonna give him a scar on his right eye, because his eye is partially shut. His right eye is partially shut, too. Well, you know, one of his eyes is to indicate that he probably suffered, like, some sort of injury to it, like, during, like, the shipwreck, or, like, you know, his time on the island, so... Nice. I'll probably make it like a more subtle looking scar since none of the characters really have noticeable looking scars. But I still want to like kind of, you know, I want people to know that it's there, but I don't want it to be too obvious. Yeah, that'll work. He looks handsome. Handsome. And then, well, actually, one more thing. I want to make sure his eyebrows match. Alright, change color. Alright. Hold on. I'm trying to figure out his wig. Yeah, I guess that'll work. I can always go back and change it. It's just the wig. I'm not editing the meat itself. Just the hair. Alright, and we'll worry about Moose later. I don't want to spend too much time. Alright. So yeah, this week has been a bit... I don't want to say slow because time always goes by fast, but... I don't know, it's just kind of been dragging on. Because, you know, first of all, you know, we've just been waiting for Papa's Mokeria to come out. We're finally in the last Well, I'll say 6 hours because, you know, it comes out at 9 a.m. It's almost 3 a.m. But yeah, also, my grandparents' dog has been here since Memorial Day. And I don't know, but when he's here, time seems to go by slower. Probably because, you know, I'm looking forward to him leaving again. That way I don't have to worry about him being in the way. My brother's asleep, so this part doesn't really matter at the moment. Plus I'm up. Plus I'm not, you know, I'm just doing a video. I'm not trying to really relax or sleep, but, you know, sometimes, like, he'll leave his door open, and then, you know, sometimes my brother be a bit chaotic with his, you know, friends online while playing games and whatnot. So it can be disruptive. Because even with my door closed, like, his door is not closed, so it's not really enough to muffle out, like, you know, the noise that comes from his room. And yeah, this, you know, the dog is very, you know, gluttonous, and, you know, he's always freaking out, like, when we're going in there to make food, you know, like, he's annoying. I don't know when he leaves exactly. I know my grandparents are supposed to be here Wednesday, but they may not get him till Thursday. You know, even my dad doesn't really like to, admit it, but, you know, even he, you know, looks forward to the dog, you know, going back to my grandparents after a while. I mean, he says he loves Zach because, you know my dad, like, you know, he's just one of those dog lovers, but, you know, Zach requires, like, special attention due to him having separation anxiety. Plus, like I said, you know, he's very, like, and this isn't just Zach, this is most dogs in general, but you know how dogs can get when you're trying to make food. You know, it's very disruptive. Now this is gonna be a back burner project, but eventually I would like to write a book about just the impact of dogs, you know, on, like, society and, you know, people, the household. But, you know, it's gonna require, you know, a lot of thought and possibly a lot of research. Can't speak. Research as well. So, you know, it's gonna be till, like, way, way, way later on. I haven't, but I'm just gonna say I have, so we can move on. Get going with this already. You know, I prefer magic-based jobs over attack-based jobs. Because, you know, we'll have, like, moles. And, you know, they can dodge, like, physical attacks, but not, like, magic attacks. So I'm probably just gonna give my me you know, magic jobs as well for Greenhorn and next door. And then, of course, Realm of the Fae, I'll be a princess. And yeah, I'm probably just gonna keep the default except for the, you know, Sage and the Dark Curse, because I've always had my OCs. Azure and Icy, respectively, for the Great Sage and Dark Curse. It's basically just tradition at this point. There's not really much to it. It's actually how I created Icy. And then I eventually just decided to make him into an actual OC. But, you know, personality and lore-wise, you know, he doesn't really have any actual link to the Dark Curse. It's just something that started. But yeah, like I said, you know, that is a book project that I want to eventually tackle, if at all possible. I'll talk a little bit about the positive aspects too, you know, and then I'll talk about why people decide to get a dog, and then, you know, I'll offer solutions and compromises for, like, you know, people who still want a dog. That way the book can be a bit more nuanced, I guess you could say, and, you know, appeal to a wider audience. But, you know, the whole negative aspect, you know, that's the main section I want to tackle, because a lot of people don't realize that, well, dogs can, you know, bring positivity into people's lives, but, you know, society as a whole, you know, it doesn't really understand that, you know, dogs can also negatively impact people's mental health as well. And physical health, for that matter. I know Ashton, you know, he relates to me when it comes to, like, dogs for the most part. Now, there are, like, certain dogs and dog breeds that are, like, you know, okay, you know, they're pretty chill. They're not intrusive or disruptive, but for the most part, you know, him and I are both we just do not like dogs, period. Luckily, you know, he doesn't have to deal with it. He's never had to deal with, like, having a dog in his household, unlike me. But he does want to get, you know, some cats later on down the road. Like, maybe when he's living with, like, you know, his brothers, or when he's, like, living with, like, you know, his boyfriend, you know, they want to get dogs together. I mean, not dogs, cats. You know, because they're both, you know... His boyfriend also has to deal with living with a dog against his will. But you know, they both much prefer cats. And then, you know, Purple Ethan, he feels pretty much the same way. He's much more of a cat person. I'm honestly a pet-free person. I know a lot of people don't like pet-free people for some reason. But I'm like, you know, pets are just not my thing. But if I did have to choose between, like, you know, having cats or having dogs, I would choose cats. because at least, you know, they're a lot more quiet, you know, clean, calm, independent, you know. Ashton actually said that, you know, people who, you know, don't really like pets in general, if they, you know, they usually prefer cats, and, you know, that does make a lot of sense, because, you know, dogs are more hyper and loud, and, you know, they require more attention, you know. Cats are, I guess you could say, they're kind of closer to, like, not have, like, to a you know, to not, you know, a household with, like, you know, cats, for example, might feel closer to not having pets than a household with dogs, if that makes any sense, because, you know, like I said, you know, cats are calm, you know, dogs are hyper. Dogs are loud, you know, cats are usually quieter, so, yeah. I do wish my grandparents would wait till, you know, the dog passes away, and, you know, and then they can start going on vacations to their heart's content, but I wish they would understand that, you know, it's, like, it's a bit careless and irresponsible, in my opinion, traveling as carelessly as they do when they have a dog with separation anxiety. Now, I understand that, you know, it's hard to really think about the future, you know. You can't, it's hard to really think, oh, okay, well, this is gonna, you know, because, you know, the dog's pretty old, like, I think he's like, you know, gonna be 15 years old soon. But I do wish, you know, like, more, like, before people get a pet, you know, they should, like, you know, think about, like, the consequences. They should think about their lifestyle. You know, getting a pet, especially a dog, that's not something you should do just on a whim. Like, I know they wanted to get the dog out of a messy situation. Plus, it was on their porch. It ended up on their porch. But I feel like they should have taken him to, like, a non-kill shelter. I know, like, people are, like, scared of, like, shelters because, you know, some of them do kill animals. You know, even if it's, like, humane, like, you know, through euthanasia, you know, that could be disheartening for people. But, you know, there are non-kill shelters in the area. Matter of fact, we need more of them. We do need more non-kill shelters. Alright, I'm gonna be a mage. But yeah, that, you know, that's some kind of like some other stuff I would like to talk about in that K9 book. You know, alternatives to getting a dog, you know, what to do if you want to help out a dog, but you're not in the position to, you know, just different stuff like that. I've also noticed that, you know, a lot of relationships end up getting strained because of an unwanted, well, pets in general, but, you know, I mostly see it with dogs. Now, I think, you know, couples living separately, you know, I think that should be normalized, actually. I'm not saying couples shouldn't live together, but, you know, there shouldn't be anything weird about, you know, them living separately either. Especially if they have, like, certain incompatibilities that could, you know, strain their relationship later on. Now, Ashton and Eli, you know, they're pretty compatible. They have a lot in common. I think they could work, you know, living together, but, like, you know, if you're, let's say you, like, really want dogs, but your partner doesn't, or vice versa, you don't want the dogs, or your partner does, you know. In cases like that, I think it's actually a lot better to live, like, in separate houses. Now, I know, like, you know, housing is, like, extremely expensive, like, you know, these days, but, and then, you know, some people might want to live together so they can, you know, help each other both, like, you know, pay, you know, both financially and then, like, you know, domestically with, like, cooking and cleaning, but, you know, that is a good advantage of, you know, couples living together. And then, you know, some, you know, and then even if, like, couples are living together, you know, they may still be 2 bedrooms. You know, some couples may still decide to sleep separately, but in the same house. I think that's what Ashton and his boyfriend plan to do. But, like, you know, living in separate houses, and in my opinion, I think that could be good for, you know, couples, you know, that have, like, you know, they work, like, as a couple, but, you know, living together could cause, you know, issues between them. It's good for couples to have their space. And you know, that's actually a topic that I will be tackling in that possible book. You know, I'll talk about how, like, you know, like, if you're not, like if someone's, like, a dog person, but the other person in the relationship isn't, you know, they could, you know, I'll talk about how it's okay for, you know, couples to live separately. Another thing, too, that I want to, another topic that I want to tackle is, you know, dog ownership regret. Because, you know, some people may actually regret getting a dog, and then, or, you know, something happens that makes them realize that, you know, having a dog is not suitable for the household. There's actually a subreddit dedicated to, you know, people who regret getting dogs. It's not super duper active, but the fact that someone created a subreddit just for that, you know, says a lot. Like, you know, there are, like, but, you know, there are dog nutters that, you know, shame people for rehoming their dog. But, you know, I think that's a lot more responsible than keeping, like, a dog, you know, even if it, you know, is detrimental to, like, you know, another person's health. I do agree that people should, you know, think things through before getting a dog. But at the same time, you know, there's things that you can't predict as well. So, yeah, I kind of see 2 sides to that, you know. People shouldn't be shamed, but I do agree with the whole, you know, people should, like I said, think things through before getting a dog, because a lot of people just love dogs, and then, you know, or they want to help a dog, they want to rescue a dog from a situation, so they just kind of do so on a whim. you know, that's not good. But at the same time, people shouldn't be shamed for, you know, coming to regret their decision, or if like something comes up. For example, I saw a post on social media. Someone was trying to rehome their dog because their baby had an allergic reaction to it. And then like a lot of people were attacking the original poster and even saying they would like rehome the baby instead. You know, that's another screwed up thing about a lot of, you know, dog nutters is they choose dogs even over their own freaking family. Oh my god, it's just fucked up. I can understand choosing a dog over a stranger because, you know, you've developed a bond, a companionship with, like, your pet, but choosing a dog over your freaking family member, especially your children, it's beyond fucked up. For now, I think a good thing I will talk a little bit about, you know, dogs and in my memoir. It won't be a super big topic, but I'll talk about how I have sensory issues and how dogs contribute to that. Like I said, it won't be like, you know, it'll be a very small part of the book, but I do want to get it through to society and to my family, you know, about how I'm not saying autistic people can't like dogs. There's probably plenty, but I noticed that quite a few of us do tend to dislike dogs due to sensory and, you know, disruption problems. You know, because we can be very... what's the word? Territorial, I guess, about, like, our personal space. And dogs have no sense of it. Buddy. Alright. I do want a strong physical attacker, since I'm a strong magic attacker, so we're gonna have Moose. He's gonna be a warrior. Robbie's gonna be a stubborn warrior. Moose is gonna be a cool warrior. And then I'll also talk a little bit about, you know, the link between dogs and autism in my general autism book. For, you know, the same reason. I'll talk about, like, you know, why certain, you know, people on the spectrum tend to dislike dogs. Because maybe it might help my family, help my parents to understand a little bit more. I don't know. They're kind of hard to get through to, though. But maybe, like, having, like, an entire book to present to them might be more efficient than just me verbally explaining myself to them. I don't know. I'll just have to see. You know, that's why I can't wait to get my bank account, because, you know, it's gonna be challenging to stick with it, especially because, you know, I'm gonna have my work cut out for me. Like, you know, these books are gonna be very detailed, but I do want to try to stick with it and see if I can figure out how to self-publish these books. Because if they help me to be more understood and others to feel less alone, then I think I'm doing a pretty good job. Bon voyage. And I'll try to go to sleep after this, but I'm not gonna count on it. I just want 9 o'clock a.m. to get here, please. But yeah, I love my parents and all, but there's just a lot of stuff. And my grandma on my dad's side, like, there's just a lot of stuff they just do not get. And it goes beyond the dog, believe me. Like, you know, there's a bunch of, like, another something else that has caused massive problems from their ignorance is, you know, people on the spectrum, you know, a lot of us, you know, we get very, very stressed out, even depressed when we are out of our comfort zone, especially to, you know, a great degree. And my parents have been downright insensitive about it. Like, I've told the story before about how my mom and I, back in 2017, my mom and my dad were still together, and my mom was still living with us. But basically, like, I believe it was in May 27. It's gonna be almost a decade ago next year. Jesus Christ. But yep, May 2017, I believe it was, or April. But basically, my mom and I got into a big fight, all because I didn't want to go to Virginia. At first, she was understanding, but I feel like my dad was being manipulative about the whole situation. And then, you know, my mom all of a sudden became, you know, insensitive about the situation as well. Because my dad told my mom something that she ended up agreeing with, and that I disagree with. My dad told her that families are supposed to do things. Well, I do agree to some extent, but it shouldn't be at the, you know, families doing things together. Like, yeah, that is important, don't get me wrong, but it shouldn't be at the expense of, like, you know, my boundaries. And, you know, that's the part I disagree with, is, you know, my dad putting, you know, my dad not caring about my boundaries, you know. That's where it gets to be insensitive. Good. But yeah, that's something else I want to cover in my memoir and then my other general book about autism. You know, it's very important to respect boundaries. I mean, we all have boundaries, you know, even, like, you know, non-autistic and neurotypical people have them, but, you know, they're a lot stronger for people who are on the spectrum. Like, it's counterproductive, because, you know, you want to, like, you know, you want to spend time with your family, you know, that's valid. You want to, like, keep a tight relationship, that's valid. But if not caring about boundaries, it's not gonna make your relationship with your children more, you know, close and strong. It's actually gonna strain it and cause your children to, like, you know, distance yourself from them. Yeah. Let's go, Moose. Oh my god. And here's something else. You know, my dad, he does not understand that people on the spectrum, you know, we are more susceptible to burnout. And, you know, we want to take our time with things. But, you know, my dad doesn't get that. Like, he's just rushing me to succeed. I tried to lie to him about not wanting to be an author anymore, but it hasn't worked. So I just feel really trapped right now, guys. Why did I lie to him about being an author? About not wanting to be an author? Well, he started harassing... Well, I don't know if harass is the right word, but... I'll just say it this way. Like, you know, he started putting pressure on me to, like, win a Pulitzer Award. So I tried to lie and tell him I don't want to be an author anymore to see if it would get him off my back, but he still brings it up, so... But yeah. Ooh, Moose! Good job. But, you know, that is something I do want to talk about in my memoir is, you know, how people on the spectrum, you know, we do things at our own pace and how we're more susceptible to burnout. I also want to write a parental guidance book and then sometime down the road too. And one of the stuff I will tackle is, you know, not having unrealistic expectations for your children. You know, celebrating even the small accomplishments as well. Because, you know, I still have passion to write, don't get me wrong, but now I kind of feel like no matter what I do, my dad's just not going to care. He's just going to brush it off and be like, alright, Cole, now do this. And, you know, that's not a feeling you want to have. And, you know, that's certainly... You don't want your children to feel like you'll never be proud of them. You know, that's not something you ever want to do. And I'm gonna warn my readers that whether they're, like, you know, already parents or they're considering becoming parents, like, I love my dad and all. He can be a cool guy, but just, you know, him, my mom, my grandma on his side and my brother, like, you know, they just don't understand autism. Like, I feel like that's the main thing that has caused a strain in my relationship with them. And, you know, it's not just me. I'm sure a lot of people who are on the spectrum can relate to this. You know, they don't really feel like they can truly connect with their family due to, you know, just the double empathy problem. You know, that's actually a proper term, you know, to describe, you know, the incompatibilities between people, you know, who are on the spectrum and people who are not. Because, you know, our brains are wired differently. So it's kind of hard for us to form mutual connections with people, you know, unless, you know, we're in a similar situation from them. Or, you know, to them. A similar situation to them. You know, we connect a lot more, a lot people, you know, I can't speak, I'm sorry. We connect a lot better with people, you know, who are, like, similar to us. Like, for example, people who may also be on the spectrum. But, you know, me and my family, you know, I feel like I stick out, you know, among my family like a sore thumb. Like, you know, they're a bunch of, like, you know, perfectly round pegs that can just fit right in the round hole, and then, like, you know, I'm this weird, awkwardly shaped peg. You know, that's basically the best comparison, the best way to compare about how I feel with my family. And I'm hoping my memoir especially, can help bridge the gap between us. I guess that's the word. It can help bridge the gap between us, and then they can come to, like, a better understanding of me. Because, you know, I do love them, and, you know, I want to help create a better understanding between us. You know, it's just kind of hard to do it without, you know, by just simply, you know, talking to them casually. Maybe, like I said earlier on, maybe, you know, having like, you know, an actual book about myself that I can present to them, you know, will be more efficient. Because, first of all, you know, it's easier to really explain yourself when you're, like, sitting down and writing it, and not just, you know, talking verbally on a whim. Plus the memoir, you know, it'll be a lot more in-depth. You know, sometimes it's just easier to understand writing than it is to understand, you know, verbal. Blah, 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 blah. So, I'm hoping that helps. And, like, and yeah, I'm not gonna wanna, you know, show them my possible memoir, you know, right away. I'm gonna wanna try to, you know, build a positive reputation around it. That way, it'll serve as, you know, good reinforcement. You know, it'll help. My family will then understand, like, oh, you know, people relate to this. You know, Shauna's not just spewing bullshit, you know. Quite a few people have been able to relate to her. So, I'm hoping by waiting to present my memoir to them, you know, it'll help them to, you know, take it, like, more seriously. I've also noticed that, you know, people on the spectrum also have... Now, this isn't to say neurotypical people can't be this way too, but I have noticed and even heard, you know, that, you know, people who are, like, autistic, you know, they have a bigger chance of, you know, being on the asexual spectrum or even the aromantic spectrum, but might, you know, feel more connected with fictional characters. You know, that's something I relate with deeply. I thought I called one more companion. Yep, King Ollie. He'll be here in probably the next part. I do want to end this off pretty soon. Yeah. That's actually something else I will talk about in my memoir. I'll talk about how you know, I've never really connected, like, you know, romantically and sexually with people, but I do, you know, have strong connections with fictional characters. Because people with autism, you know, we tend to develop strong hyperfixations. It can be on, like, topics, objects, franchises, or even fictional characters. You know, there's just, like, you know, these are things that people just do not talk about, and I'm gonna be the one to finally bring them to light. Okay, I think, if I remember correctly, the cinema and the cafe tickets were the ones that would crash your game, so we're just gonna wait. Closer alert. Maybe Moose will be a closer again in Papa Smokeria, which I'm pretty sure he and Whippa will. If anything, I think Bertha is probably going to be replaced with Yuko. That's my prediction. Because in Pizzeria Deluxe, Whiff got replaced with Yuko. But I could be wrong. You never really know with Flipline. I've learned that I can't put things past them anymore. Alright, we'll do this. Okay, I think this is where we meet the Great Sage. Yep. Who dares? Who dares enter my turf? I imagine the Red Fiend saying that. I imagine the Red Fiend being like in a deep voice, like, who dares enter my turf? Alright. Azure! Oh, right here. And then, like, I'll adjust her makeup and hair and whatnot later on. I don't really like Mii's without makeup or hair. They look kind of like just, I don't know, too simplistic. The makeup and the wigs, you know, it gives them more detail and realism. And yeah, I'm not saying, you know, neurotypical people can't be in relationships. Or that autistic people can't be in relationships. Or that neurotypical people can't, you know, develop strong attractions to fictional characters. But I do feel like there is a link between autism and, you know, fixations on fictional characters. And even, like, you know, self-shipping, for example. I try to be cautious when I talk about self-shipping on YouTube because there's a lot of toxicity when it comes to anti-self-shipping. So I try to be very cautious when I bring it up on here now, but for the sake of this discussion, I figured I'd bring it up for a little bit. I won't mention who my current fictional other is. Green Ethan, you already know, but you know, I will say that yes, I am a self-shipper. But yeah, I am aware that there are autistic people like who are in relationships, and that there are neurotypical people who still self-ship. You know, I'm not saying like, you know, oh, every autistic person self-ships, or every self-shipper is autistic. You know, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there is like a link between the two, even if you're only one or the other. And yeah, I'll be sure to also acknowledge it in my book. Because, you know, I don't want to just sound like I'm generalizing or stereotyping. You know, because, that's not what I want to do. You know, because on one hand, you know, generalizations and stereotyping, you know, that's harmful. But at the same time, you know, people do need to acknowledge that there could be, like, a link between two different things, such as autism and hyperfixations towards fictional characters, for example. Because, you know, autism is very nuanced, like, you know, it can vary, you know, greatly from person to person. But there might also be a lot of stuff, you know, certain people relate to. Like, certain people may relate to emotional dysregulation, for example, or even, like, mental health problems, but, you know, some people may not relate. You know, people who are autistic may not relate to that. You know, it's just one of those it's complex things that you have to make sure you approach with caution. Okay, good. We gotta get rid of the cloud enemies so they don't heal. Sorry, the stick Joy-Con drift. Yes. Okay, good. Good. No more annoying healing enemies. The enemies should heal us instead. Jump slash. Alright. Oh. Ah. Alright. Now, I know you see him as laid back, but I want to keep the personalities between my main teammates diverse. So I'm gonna put him as cool. That way I'll be kind, you will be laid back, Robbie will be stubborn, and King Ollie will be cool. And then, you know, I need a cleric, so he's gonna be a cleric. Alright. I know I said I'll end this off, but I kind of want to get him settled in, so... We may do one more. Alright, hold on. One more match. Plus, yeah, I'm not in any rush. I'm just trying to get 9 o'clock here already. But I am running out of stuff to talk about. I guess I'll just talk a little bit about Valkyrie to go. Or Deluxe, I mean. Yeah, because I might actually record, or not, I'm recording this, but premiere this tomorrow night. Okay, good. I always get anxiety when my Miis are buying stuff because they could fuck up. Fuck that feature. Alright. Yeah, I need to. Yeah, I need to stick with Ollie for now because you know we gotta strengthen our relationship. But yeah. Ooh, okay, yes, I know what to do. Since we have everyone here now, we're gonna go to the treasure chest. But yeah, I'll give my predictions for Mokuria Deluxe. First, I'll give my closer predictions. I think Duke Gotcha is gonna come on Monday, Whippa on Tuesday, Patrona on Wednesday, Quinn on Thursday, Yuko on Friday, Moose on Saturday, and then of course JoJo on Sunday. So basically almost the same as, you know, the to-go counterpart, but I predict that Yuko will come instead of Bertha on Friday. Yeah. Did I say Friday? She'll come on Friday. I don't know. But yeah. Duke, Whippa, Patrona, Quinn, Yuko, Moose, and JoJo. I don't even know if I said the same thing. Ugh. But yeah. Well, like I said, almost the same as to go, just you go instead of Bertha on Friday. And then, like, as for holidays, I think it's gonna be almost the same. I'm still unsure of what will, like, I do think at least one holiday will get replaced. I'm just hoping it's not Valentine's Day in February. So, hopefully, I think the holiday lineup is gonna go like this. Ooh, okay. But yeah, I think it's gonna be Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Lunar New Year. Yeah, I think we're gonna have New Year replaced with Lunar New Year. Then hopefully Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, Cherry Blossom Festival, Cinco de Mayo, Summer Luau, Starlight Jubilee, Brew Stop, and then finally Sugarplex Film Fest. So basically the same, almost the same as Mokuria to go, but instead of regular New Year, we're gonna get Lunar New Year. Well, guys, I think that will do it for this episode. I will see you guys later. Goodbye.